as Christians, we have this remarkable belief that God, the Almighty, all-powerful, supreme creator of the universe, the source of all being, humbled himself to become human. And maybe what's even more remarkable is that we talk about that as though it's the most ordinary and boring thing ever. Somehow we look at the story of Jesus as though it's just nothing of any great significance. Or at least this is the way many people think. You know, we look at Jesus and we just think, well, he's just a nice prophet. He's just a good moral teacher. You know, why is he any more special than any of the other religious leaders in the world? And this is an astounding thing, that his divinity, his glory, has almost intentionally been hidden from us. God is trying to reveal himself to the world, but he knows that that revelation is going to be way too much for us. It would be like me trying to reveal to you the glory of the sun, and somehow we were able to pull the sun out of our solar system and bring it into the middle of this church. You would not like that if it happened. You would not be able to contain the heat. You would not be able to contain the power of that star in our midst. There's a reason why we like it to be so far away. And so this idea that God, who is infinitely more powerful and glorious than the sun in our solar system, that this God would now come into our midst and look at us face to face. The only way that that is physically possible is if God, Jesus, almost shields that glory from us. And so for all these years, he has walked with his disciples, hiding his true identity, hiding his true nature from them. And so we understand that amongst the disciples, there were all sorts of different opinions about who he was. Is he just a prophet? Is he going to be this political Messiah who will overthrow the Romans for us? Is he just a good rabbi, a good teacher? But it's on this moment when he invites three of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, to journey up Mount Tabor. And there they are given a glimpse of that glory. In this one moment, it's like he takes off that cloak which has shielded them, and suddenly he is just glowing brighter than the sun. And they see Moses and Elijah standing there representing the law and the prophets, and they realize that this is the fulfillment of what the prophet Daniel spoke in the Old Testament. This glorious vision of heaven in adoration and worship before the one upon the throne. No wonder the disciples had no idea what to say. You know, they would have been so stunned. And could you imagine what would happen when Jesus says, when we go back down this mountain, don't tell anyone about it? They go back to the other disciples who are still having all of their petty little arguments about who's the favorite, different politics of their religion, different trivial concerns. And I would imagine that Peter, James, and John would have just been sitting in the corner of the room, absolutely dumbstruck, saying, guys, you don't understand who this guy is. Like, if you actually understood, we would be flat on our faces in adoration before him, because he's the Lord. He is the King of kings and Lord of lords. He is the creator of heaven and earth. I can only imagine that these three men, from that point on, their whole way of looking at him would have been profoundly different. Their whole way of living their lives would have been profoundly different because of what they've seen. down through the history of the church, we've realized that this transfiguration experience was not only for those three men, but in every generation, Jesus is wanting to reveal that same glory to everyone who is baptized. And this maybe is the great mystery, that with the disciples who were so busy down in the valley, consumed by worldly affairs, too busy to actually climb the mountain and go into that uncomfortable space of silence. In the same way, I think the vast majority of Christians find themselves in that position. We believe because there is something in our hearts drawing us to the truth. And that encounter of belief is quite profound. But what you see is that in every generation, there are people who feel called into that space of silence. And they see a glimpse of his glory. And sometimes that glimpse is only like a fraction of a second as they're praying. But it is life transforming. And I've seen this in the lives of so many people who will be ticking along in their faith journey, just going along in first gear, nothing particularly profound happening. And they might decide to go away on a retreat, and they come back absolutely transformed, overflowing with excitement. You can't shut them up because all they want to do is talk about Jesus. And the obvious question is, what did you see? And often they can't put it into words. They're struggling because it was just a fraction of a second, but they saw something of his glory. And from that point, their life takes a completely different trajectory. You know, in our Catholic Church, you look at so many people who take up the calling as contemplatives. And really, it's absolute madness. I don't know whether you've ever heard of this particular monastic order called the Carthusians. If not, when you go home, look them up. The Carthusians are pretty much the most extreme monks in our church. They only talk for 1 hour a week. They used to not talk at all, but the Pope said, you really need some brotherhood time. They spend their whole lives in absolute silence, just praying in contemplation. And you look at that and you think, it's madness. Why would a person leave everything to go off into a remote monastery in the mountains and live the rest of their days virtually like a prisoner in a tiny little cell, just praying? And I think the answer is that they saw something. They encountered that glimpse of the glory of Christ, and they would be prepared to sacrifice everything just to stay on that mountain. I think what this witness is for us to realize that there is so much more. In the time of Jesus, when you read through the scriptures, every time people encounter Jesus, there are two responses. The scriptures say people were either astounded at who he was, they were astounded by the miracles, or they were angry because what he said or what he did challenged them so much. The one emotion that is never mentioned in the Gospels. At no point in any of these encounters does it say that someone met Jesus and they were bored. And yet you come to church today where you ask the average young person, what's your experience of church? I'm bored. And I think this is where we have missed the glory. We have missed this revelation of who Jesus is. And maybe the problem at the heart of this is that the ones who are proclaiming it have not seen the Lord. You know, that if the preachers, if the teachers in the schools have not had that encounter, then all we are proclaiming is an idea or a concept. the values of Jesus, the Spirit of Jesus. Whereas if you have seen his face, if you've seen a glimpse of that glory, you're actually proclaiming a person who is life transforming. This is what our church has to come back to. At the turn of the new millennium, Pope Paul II wrote a document for the church called Novo Millennio Iniunte, if I remember it correctly. It was basically on his vision for the third millennium. And it was very simple. He said the plan for the church, if the church is actually going to transform the world, there is only one thing we have to do. Seek the face of Christ. Gaze upon the face of Christ. And throughout the document, he just keeps repeating this one concept again and again and again. And I think this was because Pope John Paul II realized that we can only truly become the Church of Jesus Christ if we are the people who have climbed Mount Tabor and entered into that space of silence and seen that revelation of his glory. And so I think we need to come back to this vision, to seek the face of Christ, to realize that there is so much more to the story that we have not encountered. And to really pray and say, Lord, open my eyes. Cleanse me of my sin that blinds me so much. And take me into that place where I can just see even the tiniest glimpse to understand who you are, and so that I can fall to my knees and worship.